Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, a special deep dive episode that we record exclusively for our patrons on Patreon and our academics in the Bestseller Academy. And a very special episode today. I've got Tim Lott with me today. Tim is the multi-award-winning author of 10 novels and a memoir. Tim has been teaching writing for the last 10 years as a lecturer, teacher, mentor. He taught for 3 years at the Faber Academy, Guardian Masterclasses, and he teaches with partners John York and Will Storr, collectively known as the Storyboard. He's also taught creative writing at Brunel University and lectured at the University of East Anglia. And he has a book out called Yes, No, But Wait, The One Thing You Need to Know to Write a Novel. Now, Tim has said that you can't teach someone how to write a novel, one of the many myths propagated by the novel writing industry. But he mentions unteachable qualities of ability, endurance and luck, and one thing you need to know. Tim, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Very well indeed. I really like the way you delivered the title of the book. I've been trying to work out in interviews, because if I just sort of say it flat and go, yeah, it's called Yes, No, but it just doesn't sound right.
It's the exclamation point. Yes, no, but wait.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to wave the hand, and so you've given me a very good tip there. I'm going to really bring the whole thing to life. I'm going to go do some method acting. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Our pleasure. Now, look, I've got shelves of books on how to write novels over there and the craft and everything. And your one has garnered praise from the likes of Robert McKee and a friend of the podcast, John York. We've had John York on in the past. So what's different about this one? What is that one thing?
Well, the one thing is two things, but they are one thing. I hope I'm making myself clear. No, they're like a intermingled two strands of DNA that are sort of twined together, and they are essentially the same thing, but there are two aspects of the same thing, and that one thing you could call plot and character. Plot and character are intertwined because you can't talk about one without talking about the other. You know, the plot is what happens to a character. A character is what a person does in response to the plot. And also you could think of character. People spend a lot of time thinking about what a character is as a kind of internal plot. You know, so a character is what's going on within somebody created for a book, and the plot is what's going on the outside, if you see what I mean. So they are intimately connected. They're not quite the same, but you can't talk about one without talking about the other. So I don't think I'm cheating too much by calling it the one thing. And also I think calling it the two things just doesn't have the same ring.
Have the same ring, does it? No, exactly. Where did that title come from? Yes, no, but wait. How does that tie in to the one thing?
It comes from a quote by David Mamet, actually, which I will, I don't know if I'm going to just disappear on your Zoom screen. If I just bring it up here, I will just see if I can find it. The quote is this, and it's from his very, very good book, The Two Uses of the Knife.
Of the Knife, great book.
Which I think is Three Uses of the Knife, I'm sorry. So what do we wish for in the perfect game? He's talking about the perfect baseball game. Mm-hmm. Do we wish for our team to take the field and thrash the opposition with the first moment, rolling up a walkover score at the final gun? No, we wish for a closely fought match that contains many satisfying reversals, but which can be seen retroactively to have always tended towards a satisfying and inevitable conclusion. We wish, in effect, for a 3-act structure in which act of the game recapitulates the game, following the parading, yes, no, but wait.
Excellent stuff. So, Mamet there, I mean, I went through a phase of reading almost everything Mamet. When I was a young writer, you know, I'd done a couple of Mamet plays as an actor. I read his books about acting and the craft and writing theatre. He's someone who I think rightly sort of lives in fear of boring the audience, boring the reader. He is constantly delivering drama. And that baseball analogy there is about sort of giving shape to the drama. Is that where we need to start with story? A lot of people, they will pick up Robert McKee's story, they'll pick up Save the Cat and think it's all about structure. Is that kind of the wrong road to go down when we're talking about plot and character? Is there a danger that structure will just drag the character along?
Yeah, definitely. And there's also a danger that the character will pull the plot along. I mean, the thing is, you mentioned Mamet being very sensitive to the idea of boring the reader. I'm very much in sympathy with that point of view. I'm frequently disappointed when I pick up novels that they're asking too much of me, and I might just be a bit stupid, and I might be a bit ADHD, which I am, in fact. But I have a very short attention span, and if I'm not hooked quite quickly, I lose interest.
Yeah,
now I'm quite difficult to please though, because I don't like sort of things that are just bish bash bosh. This happens, and Jeffrey Archer approach to novel writing, which lots of things happen, but not very consequentiality, not much consequentiality, not much depth. So I like to have those two things together. I like to have some kind of insight going on at the same time as a plot is unfolding. And that's my absolute ideal for writing a book. But I do think your first responsibility, since you're stealing somebody's time when they're reading your book, they've paid for the book and they've given you money and your publisher's money, and now they're going to sit down and spend hours of their precious life reading the damn thing, and then you're going to sit there and give them indigestible nonsense. I mean, no, it's really not on. And I think an amazing amount of modern writing has become, and this isn't really answering your question, but I don't care. I'm going to answer my own. I think that we've become so interested in voice and style in many ways, and perhaps theme. And these are all things that are taught in writing schools, but I don't think they can be taught, funny enough. I don't think theme and voice, that's something you develop through your life in many ways. The things that obsess you personally, your life experience gives you your voice in many ways. And we've become very obsessed with this kind of thing. Well, that's all very well and good if you are a brilliant stylist. And there just aren't that many brilliant stylists out there who can carry it off. Us lesser mortals, amongst which I definitely include myself, have to rely on the time-tested mechanisms that help us through a text and keep our interest. And for most people, 95% of people, I think, 95% of writers, the voice and the style and the theme are not enough. They all have to be there, of course, but, they have to be subservient to the plot and the character, that one thing that I'm talking about in the book. And if you can school yourself in those disciplines, then you've got a starting point. No one can sit down and learn how to write. I mean, all I ever offer, and it's all I say offer when I do my mentoring and writing courses, is some hints and clues. That's all I can ever give you, and my book is about building a platform on which you can sort of look out over the landscape that you've got to negotiate. But you're going to have to do the negotiating. Not me, and no one's gonna. One of the great tropes in storytelling is the disappearance of the mentor, which is Gandalf, or Obi-Wan Kenobi at some point dying a third of the way through the story, so that the protagonist goes off on their own and has to fight their own battles. And that's exactly how I feel about writing a novel. At a certain point, you have to let go of the hand that's guiding you and dive in. And there's only so much they can teach you. And for me, that teaching is essentially lodged in the understanding of the people who populate your book and what they do and what happens to them. And that's plot and character. And of course, these things too are taught on creative writing courses and so forth. But by no means, in my view, given the prominence they deserve. If I look at, you've got all these books on writing. I too have got a huge library of books about writing. And it's quite surprising how little there is, for instance, on plot. There's a lot of it in screenwriting manuals, and I've got most of what I've learned about plots from screenwriters, not from novelists who seem to have kind of lost interest in the whole concept, which to me is absurd. You don't go, they're even quite contemptuous of it, quite a lot of them. And I think that's ridiculous. You don't go to a great screenwriter, Aaron Sorkin or Sally Wainwright and say, plot doesn't really matter. They just laugh at you. And, they're right to laugh at you. It matters. Absolutely. It matters, and that these two things, plot and characters, tower above everything else, when it comes to learning how to write. The other things are not irrelevant, but they're either minor or they are impossible to teach. Plot and character, you can teach them to a certain extent. There are certain long-established principles about both of those things that can be imparted on somebody who wants to learn to write. And then you have to let them go and do what they need to do.
So when you're teaching plot and character, what are the first principles? What are the first things that you sit down and discuss with your students?
First things I talk about is the three-act structure. Beginning, middle, end. Very, very simple. Man walks along the road. Act 1, falls into a hole, inciting incident. Act 2 is trying to get out of it. Act 3, gets out of it. How has he changed at the end of it? Mm-hmm. It's very, very simple. I suppose what I've learned from years of teaching people is that most of the teaching you get in books is over their head. They don't really know what you're talking about half the time in these books. If you read a James Wood book or something, it's so literary and highfalutin. Most people really don't know what they're talking. They don't have, then they get very lost very quickly in the morass of all this technique that they're taught. And I've learned that what you need to do is walk them through the very, very basics. And as I say, that's the 3-act structure. You can develop it into a 5-act structure if you feel like it. But, every story that's readable has got a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I think that's, and to unpack that a little bit, I'll come to character in a minute. But to unpack that about, at a very basic level, and that's what we're operating as storytellers and readers is a very basic level, because that 3-act structure is kind of coded into our mental structures. It's thesis, antithesis, synthesis. It's the way our minds work. There's no escaping it, however much you want us to play about with it. That's what our mind demands in our life as well as in storytelling. So you have to have, yes, life is bumble along as normal. There's something happens to disrupt the harmony of the life, or it might be rather inauthentic harmony. Often is something, a character who is living a life that is not to its full potential, usually, and that might be, Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, or Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, or it might be Harry Potter in his closet in the suburbs. But people are living their lives, and one day, every day something happens. Then one day something interesting happens, which casts us into the second act. And the second act is, of course, the difficult act, because it's far longer than the first act, and it's far longer than the second act. And it's when you're trying to, as it were, present your protagonist with challenges and difficulties that ultimately are going to develop or evolve the character in some way. Unless it's a tragedy, in which case, the character won't change, or a comedy for that matter, because I think if you're watching Tom and Jerry, the characters don't change, because because that's the funny thing, they don't change. They never learn anything. And we laugh at that because they're such idiots. Same with, Mr. Bean or Basil Fawlty. But it's also true of Macbeth, and King Lear. They're not learning. They're just sinking deeper and deeper. I mean, actually, not quite true of Lear, because he does learn in the end, rather too late. But it maybe but the challenge of change is key to storytelling. Whether the actual protagonist responds or not in an effective way, or a way soon enough to actually change him and change his outcomes or her outcomes, is not so important as the characters a change is demanded of the characters in Act 2. And really what you're seeing in this kind of interregnum, and what is called the void, I suppose, or the woods by John Yorke, is this place that's neither here nor there. And this is something all of us face in our lives all the time. We all come to moments in our lives when suddenly we're lost, and we don't know what to do. This is very reflective of life. We're bumbling along in our normal routine, and suddenly we've got cancer, or suddenly, our child runs away from home, or suddenly we're bankrupt. Whatever it is, we're suddenly faced with all these challenges, which we have no idea how to navigate. And that is because nothing in our experience has enabled us to navigate them. And that's kind of what you might call the didactic element of writing, is you're trying to show people. It's like a flight simulator. You're trying to show people what the possibilities are when you're put into a different situation. What kind of choices do you have to make when pressure is put on you? And choice is another massively important part of storytelling, obviously.
Yes. Yeah.
So yes, you're having to choose. You're having to move forward or move back. And moving forward is good, and moving back is not so good. But it's what we all do. We're terrified of moving on to a different phase of our lives. We're terrified, and this is all what's happening in Act 2, and in at the end of Act 2, normally in classic storytelling anyway, there's a kind of low point that's reached where you just think, oh my God, it's the end. Nothing can save me now. I'm finished. I'm wiped out. The man at the bottom of the hole lays down and just gives up and lets the ants eat him. And then something happens, or something internal or external happens, that means you rally your forces and you go, no, damn it, I'm going to get out of this situation. And then you go to fight the forces of darkness, whether they be Darth Vader or your personal fears or your personal insecurities or whatever it happens to be, within or without. You see, again, here I'm talking about Darth Vader and your personal fears. Plot, character, they're kind of the same thing. Mm-hmm. They kind of merge into other.
Lots to unpack there. I'm very much with you in that voice and style. I don't think you can give people pointers, but that is something you need to sit down as a writer and develop that on your own, develop that over time. You do that by doing it. You do that by writing and reading and discovering who you really are. Theme, I'd like to talk about theme a bit, because I think theme is one of these things that's misconstrued by a lot of writers. I think it comes from going to too many book groups where people go, okay, what was the theme of this? Oh, it was betrayal. It was this. It was brothers. It was love. And I'm a big fan of another writer, Craig Mazin, another screenwriter, Craig Mazin, who wrote Chernobyl and The Last of Us. And he talks about theme, rather than just making it one word, posing it as a central dramatic argument, a question that must be resolved by the story, and tying that in with the character. Are you familiar with this idea? This idea that it's all very good, we come up with a plot and a character, but what's driving that story? And it's very, as you mentioned, it's a thesis. The theme is the thesis. The antithesis is the challenge that must be overcome, and the synthesis is the resolution of that idea. Is that something you've come across? Is that something you would agree with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the theme or the controlling idea, if you like, is well, it can be elusive. I mean, one doesn't necessarily sit down with the theme in mind. I mean, I remember once when I was about halfway through my writing career going to do an interview at UEA, and the interviewer said to me, "Oh, all your books are about loss, aren't they?" And I really gave a double take. I thought, "Are they?" And I went away and thought about it. I thought, that they are, and that was my theme. I didn't know it was my theme, so I was writing it, because your writing comes out of your unconscious. There's no doubt about it. Your whole job as a writer is to access your unconscious mind, which is where your imagination and your ideas and your originality lies. And that's the problem with teaching writing, because teaching writing is a rational process. And writing itself is, you could say, is an irrational process or an organic process. So it's sometimes you don't know what your theme is, but it is there. Otherwise, why bother to write? And you're exploring something that's itching at you, and you're trying to find out what it means. You may not even be able to put it into words yourself. Sometimes you might come down with what you might call a superficial theme, which deepens as you continue writing. I mean, I've just simply because I've had the good fortune, it might turn out to be bad fortune, to have one of my older books, not quite optioned yet by some big TV company, and I've got to go. I've got to go and talk to all the executives about it, and I can't remember what this book's about. So I had to go and read it again. And that book was The Seymour Tapes, which is about a man who gets paranoid and starts to, out of the best of his intentions, funny enough, starts to videotape his family in secret. So he's watching them while he's not there. He wants to know what they really think of him and how they're really behaving. So the theme of that was, be careful what you wish for, or perhaps you don't know what you think you want to know. Mm-hmm. But as it goes on, you begin to understand more and more what it means to look at something, and what it means to know something, and how much do we really want to know? We all think we want to know all these things, but actually there's quite a lot we don't want to know if we just knew it, if you see what I mean. There are no-go areas, that we're better to leave alone. But that kind of theme gradually developed as I was writing what was quite quite an obvious high concept story. But the theme developed as I was writing it. But the theme is one of the things that holds a plot together. Causality is another thing, and I suppose also meaning, which is similar to theme, or relevance, I suppose. But if you haven't got a theme, I don't know how you know what to write.
Yeah,
because it's what's driving you forward, really. And of course, lots of things can drive you forward. The plot can drive you forward. The character unfolding, which as I said, is kind of inner plot, can drive it forward. But what they all in service of? And I think, at the end of the day, every writer is trying to say something, whether they quite know it or not, even in a quite cheap genre way. And not all genres are cheap. I'm not patronizing them at all, I hope. But, if you at the end of a romance, you're saying love conquers all, that's a theme, and that's a theme that has been endlessly explored. More modernly, it would be, everything's hopeless and we're all going to die. That's another theme if you want to explore that, if you find that amusing. But I think, on the whole, you have to be writing about something, don't you?
Yeah,
otherwise, why are you writing?
Absolutely. The idea of the superficial theme, I use a lot. I actually tend to write it in the front of the notebook that I'm working in. So when I get stuck, I go there and I just remind myself what it's about and the question that's challenging the characters in the story. And it always helps me get back on track. So In all your time, sort of working with students, this book feels like a collection of all that experience. What are the most common mistakes that writers are making when they start out? What are the things you are sort of trying to steer them away from?
Yes, well, I do teach a module called the 15 most common mistakes of fledgling writers.
That many.
I remember what they are. I won't give all 15, but here's some of them. I think, firstly, and this is a point that George Saunders makes, and I don't know if it's the answer to quite the same question, but he says when he's teaching his students, he can usually tell the ones that have got some chance of success because of two things. Firstly, is their understanding of the writing is a process of rewriting.
Yes.
So, in other words, if you think you're going to sit down and write a novel just like that, then you're being naive. It's a tremendous project. And my first drafts are a horrible mess. But they're at least, I've written a terrible novel, but I've written a novel, and then I go back and make it into a good novel, over time. So you've got to understand. I mean, I'm very surprised quite often how often I sort of sit down, because I'm brutally honest with my students, which is one of the things I'm, is my not necessarily successful USP, which is like, if you want to come and me to teach you, I'm going to tell you what's wrong with your stuff, I think there's this. I'm going to go on a slight side journey here, because there's a metaphor occurred to me the other day. If you go to someone teaching you to cook, and they show you how to make a souffle, and the souffle collapses, the chef goes, "Well, that's a shit souffle. You've got to go and make another one." Whereas if you in teaching writing, you write a piece of crap, and people come to you and go, that's a very interesting way of approaching it. Maybe there's another way of it. It's like, no, it's a piece of crap. You've got to be honest. That's one of the things, but that's not one of the most common mistakes. I wouldn't say being honest. What is common is the belief that somehow this is something you just sit down and do. It's not. It's something. It's a life work in many ways. It's art. What can I tell you? I mean, I don't know why writers are so reluctant to call themselves artists, but they are artists, and that means they're grappling with something unknown and mysterious. So that's one thing. The other thing that Saunders mentions is causality. So, in other words, one thing happens, and anybody who writes a screenplay knows it. I've written quite a few screenplays, all of them unsuccessful. But understand things happen because something else happens, and it all links together. And finally, the climax of the story is the sum total of all those other things happening. And that's the whole meaning of the story. As Robert McKee says, the climax of the story implies meaning, just as a crisis in the story implies choice. So you have to have things happen. So often people write material, and I have to say, well, why is that there? And now, I love that George Saunders book, actually, A Swim in the Pond on the Rain, although it's mainly about short stories, but it's a brilliant analysis by a novelist, and which is quite rare, actually. Most novelists don't seem to, oddly enough, most novelists don't seem to study story structure very carefully. But Saunders, I forgot what I was going to say about Saunders now. He talks of, I'll come back to him. But yeah, the common mistakes are the handling of time. People want a very simple thing is that people don't label where they are in time and place. If you're going to start writing historical, start off with the chapter heading 1952.
Yes.
And just tell me where we are. Or even better, Stoke Newington, 1953. I just want to know where the hell I am and when I am. and these are very, very, and who I am. Who is this person who you're asking me to spend 8 hours with? It's very simple expositionary techniques in which you orient the reader. Just let them know where the hell they are in this fictional universe that they're entering.
That's that thing of.
Do you want me to continue? There's lots of common mistakes.
No, I would. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there as well. But that thing of that kind of, and I catch myself doing this as well. That nebulous thing where you're in a character's head, but you've no idea where you are, what time you are, and it comes back to that thing of, I've got a writing style. Look at my writing style. Look. Exactly. And you're not actually telling a story. You're just saying, look, I can string a sentence together. And I catch myself doing it and go, oh no, actually, let's set the scene first of all. And also the causality thing I find is fascinating, because I find that's something that I find constantly, that new writers can write a first act really, really well and then get stuck, because that's the point where they have to make choices. Their characters have to make choices that have consequences, which means they have to go down that road or go down that road there. And once they start doing that, they can kind of get crippled with fear. And again, if you've got no plot and you don't have that plot, character, theme kind of thing going on, then you don't know where you're going. But sorry, yes, do carry on.
You're exactly right about that. There's another funny David Bowman story when he's sitting with I always imagined this is what I was going to be one day, but it never happened. He was sitting in the sort of, Sardi's grill with all his writer friends talking about writing, and this doesn't happen to me at all. And another writer comes in and they go, oh, how's it going? And the writer says, oh, I'm having second act problems. And all the writers burst into a laughter and say, everybody is having second act problems. That's where the problem is. Anyone can write a first bloody act. It's the second act, and it's so true that I know I've come across so many writers who can knock out a inciting incident and a setup.
Yeah,
but that's not where the problem is. The problem is then what the hell happens next. And it was that rather wonderful stroke terrible writer, Patricia Highsmith, terrible as a person, fantastic as a writer, who said, the thing that strikes fear into the heart of every writer is the question, what happens next? And this is the thing that I think is very interesting in a way, and one of the reasons why plot has become so downgraded amongst modern literary writers is they don't know the answer to the question. So they're kind of papering over it by their voice and tricks and literary conceits, but they don't know the answer to the question, what happens next, because they're not studying story structure in the way that screenwriters and playwrights have to in order to get a play or a screen piece commissioned.
Yeah, but that's where that central dramatic argument idea that Craig Mazin was talking about has helped me a lot, because if I ever go, what happens next, I go back to that central dramatic argument and I challenge the character with it. And that helps me get the wheels rolling again. So it's it all comes back again to plot and character and the challenges and that journey of change. I could talk to you all day, but I suspect you've got other things to do. This is
no, not really. I'm a writer. Come on. I mean, the idea that we all sit around being busy is absurd. I have acres of time on my hands while I sit staring out the window. So
Okay, well, let's
go.
Shall we continue talking about those common mistakes? If you got a few more of those to run through?
No, absolutely.
Because I love this.
There's I think another very common mistake is that instead of reading a character in a book or a novel, I'm reading the author ventriloquizing themselves, and all the characters are the same character, i.e., the author. And there's a very simple, tricks to get around this. You design your characters so they all have. And I always get these. I always sort of do these things where I say to the writer, the student, well, what's your character like? And if it's a woman, they go, oh, she's very sparky and independent, and she's sensitive. I say, okay, great, well, that's fine, but why aren't we seeing that on the page?
Yeah.
If she's sparky and independent, don't just tell me she's that. She's got to behave. Oh, no. Oh, she's annoying. Okay, well, make her do some annoying things. There's no point in sort of, telling me what she's like unless you're going to sort of display an action. And therefore, giving each of your characters, a set of characteristics, that they are then going to. I mean, I very simply put down when I'm starting to write who these characters are. Aristotle said character is repeated action. Well, it's not a bad lesson, So if you pick your nose all the time, have him pick his nose occasionally, and that'll be, and his girlfriend saying, "Stop picking your bloody nose." At least you've got a character who's fixed in the reader's mind.
I find my first drafts. I find I'm doing that thing of telling the reader what this character's like, and my big note to myself for the second draft is dramatize it. Have a moment that shows this in action and it sticks in the memory of the reader as well. It lodges with them a lot more. It's that old Billy Wilder maxim, which is if you let the viewer add 2 + 2, they'll love you forever. It's them leaning forward and becoming engaged.
Let the reader do some work themselves. He's 100% right about that. And I also should say about showing and telling, that old trope. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong with telling. We have to tell. Philip Roth does nothing but tell, but what you might say is showing is the higher form. Mm-hmm. If you can show, there was a moment in my book Rumours of a Hurricane, my second novel, in which I was faced with a problem, which was at the climax of the book. And without going into detail, there was a moment when my central character confronts his he's required to. He wants to steal some money from his ex-wife, which he knows she keeps under her bed, and he's a rather ridiculous character, if tragic. And he has a Tesco bag, and he pokes 2 holes in the bag and puts it over his head just in case he gets caught. He doesn't think there's anyone in there, so he goes over this Tesco bag to look for the money, and he walks into his ex-wife's bedroom, where he knows that the money. She always puts money under the bed. And instead of it being an empty bedroom as he expects, his ex-wife and her lover is shagging on the bed, and they both look up at him, and he's like there behind his Tesco bag, and he's looking down at them. And I remember and I can't take credit because my agent came up with it, and I said, "Well, I just don't know what to do next," because they want to stand and start shouting and screaming. I don't. That seems like too boring. And he said, no. He said, just have him take the Tesco bag off his head. And I just thought, that is brilliant, because it says everything about him. It says he's given up. He does not care anymore. And indeed, after that, he becomes a street drinker and lost, and that's, to me, was the perfect example of showing, not telling. The moment he took that bag off his head, deliberately, he made a choice to take the bag. He knew it was over, and he didn't care, because he was beyond caring. So that's the higher form. And so I'm all in favor of showing, but telling is also absolutely valid.
Excellent. It sort of ties in with your big ongoing theme of loss as well, doesn't it? So it's all these things are connected. It's all connected. It is all connected.
That's a good thing to think about. It's all connected. I mean, and that's absolutely what a book is. It's all connected, and if it's not connected, it's a book of short stories, so it's the beginning's got to connect with the end. The middle's got to connect with the beginning and the end. It's all got to connect. It's an organism. It's not an art piece of architecture.
Let's go back to your book. Yes, no, but wait. I have to say it like that now. What kind of writer would you recommend pick up the book? Is this for the novitiate who's just starting out, or is this something that someone who's maybe written a few novels can pick up, or is this for everyone in between?
Well, it's going to sound rather arrogant of me, but I rather think a lot of published writers, some of them quite successful, would not do themselves any harm by picking up the book. Because as I say, I think a lot of them have lost interest in plot and character, and are relying on other things. Often what is fashionable to write about at the moment. And they're relying on dazzle. They're relying on, give them the old razzle dazzle as the Billy in All That Jazz does a dance about. Give them the old razzle dazzle, and you know they'll think. But if you go deeper, the hard work is not in the razzle dazzle. The hard work is down in the machine room. It's down where the spanners are and the oilers, you know, and trying to get that mechanism functioning well is the real secret, I think. This is called the bestseller experiment. So if you want to write a bestseller, there's no question. There's only two ways to do it. The first way is the best way and the easiest, and that's to be a celebrity. And the second way is to write a book that everyone wants to read. You know, and that's much tougher than being a celebrity. So I would definitely become a celebrity if you want to write. Don't try and learn how to write books, because it's much too difficult.
Duly noted. Well, listeners, Yes, No, But Wait is out everywhere on 15th of June, and I shall certainly be getting a copy, and I recommend you do too, because I think this is you know, the wake-up call that we all need, and and I'm very much looking forward to it. Tim, I do have other things to do, I'm afraid, so I have to go. But I'd love to speak to you again sometime, and you know, dig a bit deeper on this as well. But thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me, and hope to speak to you again very soon.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much, Mark.